All right, so we sort of got our tone shift on a little bit yesterday, where we started talking about like our first couple populations, which were youths and seniors, and some of the physiologic differences and changes that we're going to make and stuff. We're doing the same thing today. We've got three populations to get through that are all, I want to say, somewhat related. The last one certainly is not. However, the modifications that you make are somewhat similar. And so we're going to be dealing with clients who are just severely obese, which, Thomas, you'll recognize a lot of the information from this because you've been through our weight loss program design class. So Dion, we talk a lot about obesity in that course, and what a lot of these modifications are and stuff. But then we're also going to talk a little bit about diabetes today, how to deal with clients who are managing their blood sugar, and pregnancy, which obviously is not necessarily like a, something you sort of develop or catch or anything like that, but it is obviously like a specific physiologic state. And some of the modifications that you make for obese clients are actually somewhat similar to the modifications you would make for a pregnant client. So yeah, so that is sort of where we're headed today. And I think our soap note is a pregnant client. Yeah, our example will be somebody going through pregnancy. So those are our sort of pops today that we're going to kind of get through. So when we are considering like what obesity it is, right? Obesity is going to be defined as a condition where the subcutaneous fat exceeds the amount of lean body mass. I don't really love that definition personally, but it's the overaccumulation of body fat, right? And here's the thing about like body fat, right? Like it is something that your body naturally develops, right? Like your body is designed to sort of like develop and store adipose tissue, like that's part of like what it does. But we see it as this, we see this over accumulation of body fat start to behave in really strange ways. Which is why it's so dangerous. Like if it's something that your body physiologically does, there's an argument to be made. It's like, well, why is it so bad for us then? Like why is it? What could possibly be that wrong with obesity? And it's like, well, here's the thing, right? Like when we see that happen, when we see this excessive body fat, it does start to behave in really sort of strange ways, right? Like abdominal fat, when in particular, by the way, like high body fat percentage is a high body fat percentage is actually less dangerous when it's evenly distributed around the body. We see less comorbidities, we see less incidences of mortality. But for some reason, particularly abdominal fat, starts to act very weird. It starts to almost act like it's its own little organ, which kind of makes sense when you sort of go back to your definitions of like what an organ is. An organ is nothing more than like a grouping of tissue. Like that's why every one of your bones could be considered its own organ. Every one of your muscles could be considered its own organ, because that's nothing more than like a grouping of bone tissue or a grouping of muscle tissue. And so this is a grouping of fat tissue. And so it starts to have its own metabolism. It starts to have its own sort of like functions and stuff. And it decreases your insulin sensitivity rapidly. It raises your blood pressure rapidly. And so like these are why, like this is why obesity is so bad for us. We start to see cholesterol problems, blood sugar problems, hormonal problems, and all kinds of different things. You guys might remember I mentioned this documentary that as a full documentary, I don't think it's that great. The whole thing is basically a big commercial for juicing. It's trying to get people like onto the juicing fad and stuff. But if you ever watch the movie Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, it's a really, there is some very cool stuff. I think it's a really well-made movie. I think the message is okay. Because the message is muddled with it being, having an agenda to get people onto like juicing and stuff. But like, just as a film buff, like if you like movies and stuff, there's some really good like storytelling in this sort of documentary. And What's interesting is the main guy that it sort of follows talks about like why he's doing this. And he's like, well, I'm doing this because like, he was like, I was severely obese. And he talks about how he was getting like these rashes and he was getting, you know, these like hives and things that would break out on him. And he went to the doctor and the doctor was like, you're not allergic to anything. They did like an allergy test and they were like, we can't find anything that you're particularly allergic to. And so then he eventually saw like a metabolic specialist who was like, yeah, well, you're not necessarily allergic to anything, but your body is so stressed out because of how unhealthy it is, and how, you know, due to your obesity and due to your weight and due to these things, that it's basically it's looking for things to attack. Your body is basically saying, well, you know, we are clearly in such an unhealthy state. Something has to be attacking us, or we wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't be dealing with this. And so he was getting like rashes that would just come out of nowhere, aches and pains that would come out of nowhere for no reason. And that's sort of the thing about obesity, right? This is part of the reason why we know that body fat is so bad for us. It does have these very unique, very dangerous effects on our body. So if we have that, we know that that's bad for us, we need to have a very clear way to sort of define this. Now, this is not me saying that like you are healthy or unhealthy if you fall into these categories. I like to think of it as almost like a gamble, you know? And so like, I'll talk about what I mean by that in just a second. So we're talking about your body mass index, right? This is how we're going to classify obesity. So your body mass index is just a number. It's a very simple calculation. It is a calculation of your height versus your weight. And so your BMI is going to equal your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. So if you do want to do that in sort of the American version, you can also do BMI equals your weight in pounds divided by I don't remember what that character is, but divided by your height in inches squared, and then take the whole thing times times 703. I got to put a bracket around all of this. Okay. So if you do want to do the American version, it's weight in pounds divided by height in inches squared times 703. Okay, that's the sort of Americanized sort of version of this formula here. Let's get on the page, please. Go. Now here's the thing. You know, either of those formulas is fine. It's not about the formula. It is about sort of like what the formula sort of represents and how it comes out in the end. So if you do this, right, if you run your BMI and it comes out to anywhere below 18.5, that puts you in the underweight category. So that's not healthy either. That's dangerous. And for other reasons, right? We see, you know, bone mineral density problems below 18.5. We see hormonal problems below 18.5. Lots of very physiologic abnormalities that are very dangerous. So that's underweight. Then we have what is considered normal weight at 18.5 to 24.9. Overweight is 25 to 29.9. We do start to see some health risks in that category there. And then obesity is anything greater than 30 once you sort of run that BMI number. So if we do my version of this, right, I weigh 179 pounds divided by my height in inches squared. I'm 6 foot, so that's going to be 72 inches times 72. So that's 179 divided by 5184 here, which does give us this weird little number here. I know it doesn't look like it's right, but then we've multiplied that whole thing by 703. that puts my BMI at 24.27. So I'm just barely falling into the normal weight category here, right? I'm right on the cusp there of landing in overweight, which kind of goes to show you, is this the end all be all, you are healthy number here? Definitely not. People very much misinterpret what the BMI is for. Originally it was designed, I think it was like in the 18th century, maybe. I think, when was BMI invented? It was way longer. Yeah, the 1830s. So it was invented in the 1830s. That is a very long time ago. And it was never meant to be used as a way to categorize whether or not someone is healthy. That's not what it's for. It's been very misinterpreted over the years. What it is, it's not an indicator of health. It's just a calculation of your height versus your weight. However, one thing that we do know is there is a correlation between an excessive BMI and certain health risks, but that only applies if you are doing other things that are also unhealthy, which is why I think it's kind of like gambling. Like if you go to a roulette table, it's a perfect example of what we're talking about here. Having an excessive BMI is like putting a bet on one number, and there's 35 numbers in roulette, right? Plus the 2 double zeros, or plus the 2 zero numbers. But like that's a 1 in 35 chance, right? So like, that's definitely, it does put you at risk possibly, but if you are placing, no more bets on that unhealthy table, your odds of actually developing a condition are really low. But let's say like you have an excessive BMI, and what we have, another way that we categorize obesity is what's called the waist to hip ratio. So we look at the calculation of your waist in inches divided by your hip in inches. And we're trying to look at to see if that number lands below like a certain range. So if you also fall outside of a normal category there, and you also fall outside of a normal body fat percentage, and you also start to struggle with doing like a 3-minute step test or a Rockport walk test, the more things that we start, now we're placing more bets on the table in terms of like putting us at health risks. If our blood pressure is high, if our cholesterol is high, that's how we, should view our health. Does having an excessive BMI, whether overweight or obese, mean that you are, at risk for developing a disease or a comorbidity? No, not really. It is just a correlation of your height versus your weight. And it's one of the things that we're going to look at. This is why doing a detailed assessment is actually so important for us, right? So not an indicator of health, just a calculation there. When it comes to obesity, we do know that this is sort of an epidemic in its own way. I feel like that word has been definitely like, used in the most extreme way in the last 2 years. It's like and it was an epidemic, and then, it spread to other countries, and now it's a pandemic. But obesity is definitely still an epidemic here in the US. It's something that we're seeing. About 33% of all US men are obese. Seeing about 35% of US women are obese. And we are seeing those rates much higher in Hispanic and non-Hispanic populations, right? And so we're seeing those numbers like much, much, much higher across the US, particularly in adults like 20 and older. And, there's a lot of reasons for this. So, if we're trying to explain like why childhood obesity is climbing and childhood disease is climbing, if we try to explain why we are seeing more, seniors dealing with like comorbidities and diseases and stuff like that. And if we're trying to, we got to also look at like obesity here, right? So obesity is climbing because of, again, increased sedentary lifestyles, increased access to poor nutritional content food. Yesterday, my girlfriend and I took her shopping because she doesn't have a car. And so I was doing a little bit of grocery shopping for myself. And, it's just one of those things where like she kind of grabbed some easy to cook, things that they were a little bit more expensive. And then like you know, we were looking at like our rates, and I had like all of this food, and she had like a very little bit, and she was like, how did you get so much food? You paid the same amount that I did. And I was like, well, like you have to, you know, like the stuff that I've got, I have to skin my own potatoes, I have to chop up, you know, this, I have to do that. Like I have to do a little bit more work for the food that I bought, but I get a lot more out of it. And she was like, okay. And then I, you know, kind of pivoted me, and I was talking about what I'm talking about right now, which is like, this is why people think that healthy food is more expensive. It's not necessarily actually more expensive to eat healthy, but the time it takes to prepare it, you know, absolutely takes longer, you know, and because time is money and not everybody has time, it costs them more money. And that explains like obesity in a nutshell. You know, people are going to go for inexpensive, you know, they're going to go for, you know, quick, convenient meals, and it's going to cost them in the long run, which is something we need to change the narrative around food on. You know, it drives me crazy. Yeah, I wish that like we took more time to explain to people and teach people how to eat healthier.
Just tell them uh the amount they pay monthly on fast food, and then they'll be like, what the hell? And you compare them with like what you buy monthly. You're like, wait, I just saved like half, of what I used to, whatever, or maybe
Yeah.
more.
Absolutely. You know, I'm constantly trying to like talk about that with people. And it's like that's why, you know, this is what sucks too, is like you talk about like money wise. You look at like poorer communities, like economically, you look at like places that just don't have as much money. You see a higher incidence of like obesity and things like that, right? And it's like there's more fast food in areas like that. There's more of these things, and it is because like those places thrive because the population that's there is working more hours than anybody else in the country. They're working overtime just to pay their bills, you know, and they don't have enough time to come home and like prepare like a full meal and stuff. And so it keeps people unhealthy. It's yeah, that's it's a lot of like infrastructure problems that we
It,
have in this
it
country.
keeps people unhealthy and broke at the same time. So it's like a cycle. It's like they work so hard, they earn, but then like it's like, okay, all of it goes to fast food because whatever, and then
Yeah.
they're still like telling themselves like, how come I can never invest? How come I can never save money?
Yep.
But there you go, because you keep wasting hundreds of dollars a week
Right.
literally just on fast food.
But it's also designed to like, you know, prey on that. Like those places are preying on these people, you know.
Yeah, that's true. It
um
sucks how that's like designed like that. It's weird.
right, it's what's called a feedback loop. uh
Yeah.
you know, it's you know, you do this, which causes this, that causes this, which causes this, and that starts the cycle over again.
And it's crazy how like people just can't get it. Like we try to advise them, but it's like everything we say just goes through one into the other. And it's like, what? Like just try it and then like you'll see a difference.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean that's, you know,
Eating, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
no,
go
please.
for it, go for it.
but eating like fast food and stuff, it's also like psychological because I grew up to eat whenever I'm feeling a certain way.
Sure.
I would eat for comfort. So like
Yeah.
because like in my family, my a lot of my family on my mom's side, they have like a eating dis disorder in a certain way because they eat for comfort whenever they're feeling sad, whenever they're feeling lonely, or there's nothing to do. So you have to like get that mentality out. You know what I'm
There's
saying? And like it's easy to
definitely
get
That's
that.
even
fast food.
harder. Yeah.
On every commercial, you have another fast food commercial telling you to go get the new cheeseburger or whatever, you know?
Right.
So it's like programmed in, it's like a program they have to like. So
100%. If you ever want to read a really great book about that, there's this, or about how to fight it actually. There's this great book called Intuitive Eating. Um, and it's so funny. I have a hard time, like sometimes I've had a hard time getting like clients to eat this or to read this book, because it does kind of look like it's like purple and yellow and pink and stuff, and I've had like a hard to be like, I don't know if this is the diet book for me, but trust me, like, you know, this is a terrific book all about like getting in touch with how we should be approaching food, eating until you're satisfied, but also like, learning how to be okay with, your body is going to get naturally hungry. But what a lot of people do is like, yeah, they'll seek food for comfort.
Yeah.
Then they'll feel really guilty afterwards.
Yeah.
So then they'll starve themselves, which will cause them to seek food for comfort. Ugh.
Yeah.
The whole cycle.
You're supposed to eat to survive, not just survive to eat, really.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That was good. So yeah. So we'll definitely talk about this to death in our weight loss class, which is all about like understanding the causes of obesity and stuff, and how to communicate with your clients and combat this. But yeah, it's something near and dear to my heart. My parents both struggle with this. Drives me.
Like, isn't it insane? Like, we know all this stuff going on, and then it's like our parents don't even realize it. And like, we keep telling them, but it's like, nah, I don't care what you say. You're wrong. I'm the the ones been living here longer, so I know like what's been going on. Like, I know everything. Like, shut up.
I do find that crazy. You know what I find crazier is when I feel like when I have a really hard time struggling with this. That's I find even crazier, because I'm like, I do have the knowledge, but I will be tired, I will be worn out, and I'm like, all I want to do is drive into that drive-through right now because I'm exhausted. I'm like,
Hey, but every once in a while, it's not bad, bro. Like sometimes, like I'm far away, and like last time I was in Pasadena, and I didn't have my food with me. I just had a protein shake, and I was like out of it, bro. I was like out of glycogen. I was like, I'm about to die if I don't eat anything. So I went to go grab myself an In-N-Out burger. I was like, implement it into my macros, and that's it, bro. I feel better.
Yeah. But yeah,
Every once in a while.
It's like those are the times that I really have like the clarity where I'm like, if it's hard for me, who has a pretty good amount of control, I cannot imagine how hard it is for my clients who's, they aren't personal trainers for a living,
Yeah. No, but I get it, because like even like on the weekends I do a little bit of like food delivering. So you can just imagine all the bomb ass food, especially when you're in a caloric deficit. When you're in a caloric deficit and for so long, you're just like, bro, like, it just kills you. Yeah, it kills you like crazy. It sucks, but yeah, I've learned to mentally like just, get stronger from that. Yeah.
All right. So negative effects. Part of the reason why we've already kind of talked a little bit about this, so I'll move through it kind of quick, but we do see an increased insulin response to glucose, which leads to an increased fasting glucose level. So here's what's weird about this. One of the reasons why obesity is so bad for us is your body will make more insulin in response to glucose coming into the bloodstream. Now that sounds like it's not that dangerous. Like, well, yeah, of course, there's more sugar coming in, therefore we need more insulin, and our body makes more insulin. What's wrong with that? Yeah, that's actually not. Here's how I like to think about it, though. You still have the same number of cells in your body, right? So even though you have more sugar coming in and then your body makes more insulin, the cells are just basically getting bombarded with insulin at that point, which is what causes them to lose their sensitivity. It's like, it's like, hey, do you need espresso, or do you just need coffee? Because if you're taking espresso every time, you're overdoing it. Like there's just a lot of caffeine, you're decreasing your sensitivity. That's what it is with like, increased insulin response due to obesity. So when you have more more abdominal fat in particular, your body makes way more insulin, which is what increases your chance of becoming less sensitive to that insulin. We also see decreased growth hormone. It is harder to build muscle when you are obese. It is harder to, grow your body naturally when you are obese, which is tough because, like we know, the more muscle you have, the easier it is to control your weight. And we do also see an increase adrenocortical hormones in particular. So if you've ever heard of cortisol, cortisol is a stress hormone. And it's actually a good thing. I mean, like we actually like cortisol in low levels, like cortisol is like, it's a stress hormone. It's a hormone that your body makes when it's, it's like, we like cortisol. If a bear came through my door right now, like my body would make stress, and I would be like, great, I've got the energy to run away, like, that's a good thing. If I didn't create stress hormones, I'll be like, oh, well, that's kind of furry, and I'd walk over there, like, because I love furry stuff. I love animals, like, so we like cortisol, but the problem is our bodies don't really know the difference between, oh, there's a bear over there, and oh, I'm being attacked from the inside because I have excessive abdominal fat. And cortisol is a fat building hormone. It's designed to, put your body into starvation mode to store fat, and so it is where like fat makes more fat, basically. That's not great. It also increases cholesterol synthesis and cholesterol secretion. That's not so great either. So actually, here's what's interesting. This is a weird sentence, because these two things are opposites. Cholesterol synthesis is the creation of fat. Excretion is getting rid of it, right? It's excreting, it's leaving. So what does that actually mean? They're not being very specific here, but what that means is like it's increased cholesterol synthesis of LDL, bad cholesterol. So you are synthesizing and making more bad cholesterol, and excretion of HDL, good cholesterol. So you are losing your good stuff and you are making more of your bad stuff, which is now screwing up your ratio of cholesterol, which is why those cholesterols park themselves in our blood vessels and leave us with plaque, which then increases our blood pressure and leads to coronary artery disease, atherosclerosis, and all these negative health effects. So what are our recommendations? How do we fight this stuff? How do we beat obesity, right? Well, I mean, we already kind of talked a little bit about it. It does kind of start with education, right? But that's actually, it doesn't have anything to do with our in the now workout. So that's not the what we're talking about, but we will certainly talk about that in later courses. But the recommendation is going to be circuit style training. We really like circuit training for a variety of reasons. Number one, it just burns a lot of calories, rather than doing, like, let's say you want to do a total body workout for the day, right? You want to do a chest press, you want to do a shoulder press, or pick one exercise per body part, right? Let's say you want to do a shoulder press, you want to do a chest press, you want to do a bent over row, and you want to do some bicep curls, some tricep extensions, and some squats. There we go, right? That's one exercise per body part. Okay, great. If you do those all back to back to back to back to back to back to back, rather than doing straight sets, that is circuit style training. And circuit training just burns a lot of calories. You get your heart rate up, and then rather than letting it come back down before taking it back up again, you spike it because your heart rate goes up and up and up and up and up, rather than getting a chance to come back down. And that just burns lots of calories, and is a great, very time efficient way to work out. Also, you might increase your lean muscle mass. Particularly weight training is very good for clients who are dealing with obesity. The more muscle you have, the more your body is going to burn extra calories. Now, you cannot, obviously, or at least it should be starting to get obvious by now, turn fat into muscle. You hear people say that all the time. If you want to say that to your clients and use it as like a turn of phrase, great, but it should be explained to them that scientifically those are two types of tissues. And so it does not work that way. You can burn fat for energy to fuel your ability to build muscle by working out and stuff, but no, you cannot convert fat into muscle. That being said, if you want to lose 5 pounds of fat and gain 5 pounds of muscle, that's a great way to help you lose even more fat in the long run, because fat burns, muscle burns about 4 times as much calories as fat does, which we love. So this is part of the reasons why, this is another part of the reason why trainers love legs so much. One of the reasons why we put such a huge emphasis on training our clients' legs. 60% of all of the muscle in your whole body is actually in your legs. So more than half of your muscle. So by training those muscles, you can build that up and add, 5-10 pounds of muscle without looking very different in the body. And that's going to have a really positive effect on just your overall calorie burn every day. Show you an example of what I mean by that. Let's go to a BMR calculator here. You'll notice I'm going to use the body fat percentage version. So I'm going to put a client who's 5'10", 200 pounds with 20% body fat. If I hit calculate here, they're burning about 1,938 calories per day. But if I had them at 30% body fat, they are only burning 1,742. So that's about a 150 calorie difference, close to 200 calories between those two. And if I said they had 10% body fat, it's freaking crazy. Or they're up to 2,100 calories a day at baseline, before they do anything. So that's just goes to show you what muscle does for us. In general, when you're picking your workouts, guys, you want to try to perform as many standing or at least seated exercises as possible rather than laying your client down. Then there's sort of two parts of this. Laying your client down, especially on the floor, can also be very difficult for an obese client to get up off that floor. So that can be really challenging. That's one other reason. But particularly, we're going to focus on picking standing exercises. Is the standing cable, is the cable chest press a better chest exercise when compared to a bench press? I don't know. I'd say the bench press is probably the king of chest exercises. It's a compound movement that works a lot of your pectoral muscles. But okay, well, really quickly, this is adorable.
Oh no! Damn, 85 bucks.
Yeah, right. Look at that. It even has the look at the detail. It has the leg extension part of it down below. That's crazy.
Oh, shit.
Okay. Sorry. I just totally blew my own brain. So do I think that the bench press is better than do I think the cable chest press is better than the bench press? Maybe not necessarily for building chest muscle, but it does burn more calories, which is our first priority with an obese client. And it does keep them upright, which puts them in a much more comfortable position. They're much less likely to, sort of lose their balance. They're much less likely to have to deal with getting up and getting down. So ideally, we want to pick standing exercises first, then go to maybe at least an upright seated exercise, and then finally go to laying down supine or prone. When we are choosing our exercises. So I'm not saying that I like the cable chest press better, but if I've got an obese client, it's probably the type of chest exercise I will be picking. The SMR, typically recommended for home training if your client is self-conscious. We will sometimes see that. Foam rolling can be really challenging for obese clients because they have a hard time holding themselves up. And so they might feel a little bit self-conscious about doing those types of exercises. So if that's the case, things like tiger tails are a really good alternative. This is like, if you've ever seen these, the sticks, and so you can kind of roll and SMR the body doing something like that, or like a Theracane is a really good one. That is a good alternative. This is that little thing that allows you to kind of reach up and around. You can get into the traps. That's mostly used on the traps and stuff, but this can also be a great way to get into the legs as well. You can see this person is able to sit upright and get into their calves and hamstrings if they needed to. It's a good alternative for somebody who might feel a little self-conscious about trying to prop themselves up, or even just massage guns, the various massage guns that are out there. And then when it comes to NASM, when it comes to NASM, we are typically going to focus on phases 1 and 2. If you look at a client here with the goal of hypertrophy versus the goal of maximal strength, this person's doing like 6 sets of 1 repetition. That's super low intensity. There's not going to be an opportunity to really burn a lot of calories there. But if they're doing 4 sets of 8 repetitions, that's going to be a good way to build muscle. And then if we wanted to take it even higher in terms of repetitions, where maybe they even take it all the way up to 12 to 20 repetitions, that's going to be burning a lot of calories. So phase 1 is like 12 to 20 repetitions. Phase 2 would be like 8 to 12 repetitions. Those 2 phases are going to be the most effective for our obese clients, because those are just our biggest calorie burners. So in terms of cardio, the modes that are going to be most effective, frequency, intensity, time, type, right, that are going to be most effective are any low impact cardio, right? So treadmill walking is good, but treadmill running, maybe not so much. A rowing machine is a fantastic example. Rowing machine is a really, really low impact type of cardio, or stationary cycling is a really good one. Stationary cycling, just sitting on a bike, being able to kind of just consistently go at that is also going to be a really good choice. Frequency, we want our clients moving at least 5 days per week so that we can build the habit of continually getting them to regularly exercise. With a high frequency like that, we're probably going to want to be relatively low on the intensity, which is why you can see here, we're really not going anywhere up above 80% of their max heart rate. One of the best things you can do is use the talk test. So you might remember we were using the Rpe method, right? Or at least I mentioned the Rpe method, which is that like, hey, on a scale of 6 to 20, how do you feel right now? There's also the very scientific version of like, all right, you got a heart rate monitor on, Eddie, how old are you?
30.
30, right? So 220 minus 30 times 0.8, right? It's like, all right, Eddie, I don't want you to go anywhere above 152, right? There's the very simple version of that. Sort of oversimplified actually, but we'll talk about that later. So that's that version. Both those are great, but one of the most effective things, your client who is obese might have a heart that can keep up with the cardio, but one thing they might struggle with is the breathing section, because with all that extra body weight pressing down, they may have a hard time expanding their rib cage and their diaphragm and stuff. So the talk test is actually going to be really effective for clients who are, the talk test is going to be a really effective method for determining exercise intensity for your client, right? So basically, these are very, very complicated talk tests. 3 levels. I just want the 3-level version. No, I don't want the 5-level version. Ugh, fine. All right. So here's like, that's not even it. There we go. So here's the sort of complicated sort of version of this, right? So if we look at the talk test, a 1 to 2 would be completely normal breathing, right? Absolutely normal. But then we've got like, we start to get into like the health side of things. If you're talking about the talk test, like somewhere between like a 3 to 4 on the RPE, right? That might be, can carry a conversation, but they're breathing a little bit, a little bit heavier. And then like, if they are working on like actually improving their fitness, that's going to be, they can carry a conversation, but they're breathing a little bit harder. And then like maybe they start speaking in like broken sentences where it's like heavy breathing, and then eventually they basically like have a really hard time breathing, basically can't talk while they're exercising. That's the version of the talk test I like. I like the 3 method version. They can hold a conversation, but there's a little bit of breath behind their talk. They're speaking in broken 1 to 2 sentences at a time before needing to take like a pause and a little bit of a breath. Or level 3 is like they're not talking. They're like, if I talk, I'm gonna vomit. Like that's level 3, right? Generally, we're gonna keep obese clients in 1 to 2. We can get them a little bit of out of breath, or a lot out of breath where they need to take like little pauses, but we never really get them to where they basically cannot speak at least 1 to 2 sentences at a time. That's the 60 to 80%. That remaining 80 to 100%, we're going to leave that alone for obese clients. We really are going to avoid that for the most part. In terms of the time or duration, right, that's going to be at 40 to 60 minutes per day. Or if they can't do that, we're going to go 20 to 30 minutes twice per day. Ideally, we're getting 60 minutes here because it's just a good duration to be able to burn lots of calories. And calories are sort of our priority with obese clients. In terms of assessments, there's really not a lot of restrictions here. Pushing assessment, pulling assessment, the overhead squat, the single leg squat, if possible, they can go for it, but generally single leg balance might be a little bit more recommended, just because like squatting on one leg is going to be substantially harder the heavier you are. Flexibility training, self-myofascial release is totally appropriate. It's fine if it's tolerated. If they don't feel comfortable or if it's painful, they can avoid it. But follow the overall like flexibility continuum elsewhere. They can do, static stretches, active stretches, dynamic stretches. All of those are going to be really, really great, for your clients, depending on where they are in their training. And then in general, we're going to go about 1 to 3 sets of about 10 to 15 repetitions, 2 to 3 days per week. So if you are doing like, if we wanted to keep this really, really simple, right? Let's say I want to just create like a really, simple exercise routine here. Let's say I create like 2 circuits and I pick 1 exercise per body part, and we prioritize keeping our clients like on their feet, right? So if I said like standing cable chest press for circuit, well, actually, hold on. Wow. We'll call this circuit 1. We'll call this circuit 2, right? And we start in the upper body. We'll go with like a standing dumbbell shoulder press. We'll do a standing dumbbell shoulder or lateral raise. We'll go with the chest exercise, standing cable chest press, standing cable fly. Over here, we'll go with the upper back. We'll go with the standing cable row, and we'll go with face pulls, which is also on the cable machine. We'll go with some bicep stuff. We'll go standing dumbbell curl, supinated curl, standing dumbbell hammer curl. Let's go with cable triceps extension. Let's go with, see, now here's a really hard one. Like we're at a slightly harder spot because it's like we got to pick standing versions ideally. So let's go with, we'll be a little bit more specific about that. Cable tricep extension. We'll say go cable tricep press down, and then we'll go overhead cable triceps extension. So that's the standing version where you basically go like this with the cable going over top of the head. And then we'll go with some leg stuff, right? We'll go with a goblet squat, and we'll go with a step up to balance. And there we go. We got 2 circuits here, really simple. And then we'll put the rules down here. We'll go with 3 sets of 15 reps each exercise, 60 seconds rest at the end of each circuit. And that is pretty simple, not a very complicated routine, to be sure. But if we threw that into like a warm up and a cool down, put a warm up beforehand, a cool down, and then we don't have any core stuff in here, right? So we would have like maybe a core balance reactive section before this, just like we were doing, that's our movement prep side of things. You did that 3 days per week, you're going to be burning plenty of calories. Pair that up with a little bit of cardio. Let's say this is like, you got circuit 1, circuit 2. This is your workout on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And then you go do, 60 minutes of cardio Tuesdays and Thursdays. Client's going to be in good place. That's not going to be bad. So special considerations, always make sure your client is comfortable and try to do as much exercise standing or seated as possible. Any questions so far on obesity before we move into the next one?
No, so far so
No
good.
question.
All righty. By the way, if we did want this to look sort of traditional NASM style, it would look something kind of like this. Boop. And then, where did I put it? Just for the sake of it. There we go. And then I'd probably just get rid of this SAQ part. And, you know, movement prep. Let's go with standing cable. Actually, you know what? Yeah, pallet press. And then go with like a wood chop. There we go. And then a warm up. Warm up to cool down. And there we go. Now I've got 3 little circuits that they can do in their routine. Great for burning lots of calories. All right, let's look at our next population here. So let's talk about diabetes. This is going to be really similar to obesity. I mean, a lot of diabetes is caused by obesity. However, you may run into somebody who's like type 1 diabetes. It's certainly rare. It'll be 5% of the time. 5% of the time that you have somebody with diabetes. But diabetes, again, just as a quick review, is a condition in which they have impaired glucose control. And that impaired glucose control could be because their cells are resistant to insulin, which is type 2 diabetes, or it could be that they were born with, you know, a pancreas that isn't quite as functional. That's type 1 diabetes. So type 1 is called insulin dependent diabetes. And it's where the body doesn't make insulin the way it's supposed to. So that often results in hyperglycemia, too much sugar in the blood, which again causes a lot of metabolic disturbances. Their body can't heal as fast. Sometimes their cells are basically suffocating. We will also see hypoglycemia sometimes, where eventually, you know, their body finally starts uptaking the glucose as it was supposed to, and then all of a sudden their blood sugar levels crash to below normal levels, and that can also be, you know, then they start to have like nausea problems. They start to be tired. They can go into a diabetic coma, which is really dangerous. And that's, you know, what happens when you're taking insulin sensitivity, insulin synthetically. Yeah. This is often referred to as childhood diabetes, by the way. Then we have got type 2 diabetes. This is insulin resistant diabetes, where, yeah, you've created so much insulin so often that your cells have become resistant to it. So it just doesn't work as well as it's supposed to. And so that is going to be causing heart problems, nerve problems, kidney problems, circulatory problems, and even problems of like glaucoma and stuff. So chronic high blood pressure, very, very dangerous. One of the biggest things that we'll see is that it will often cause neuropathy. So neuropathy is actually where you will get like numbness or tingling, sometimes burning or pins and needles sensations, generally in the more peripheral parts of the body. So these are sort of the areas where people will often feel it, usually in like the hands, especially the fingertips, the lower legs, and especially the toes. Those are very, very common areas to have this sort of like numbness or tingling. And it's because, again, like the nerves traveling to those areas are much smaller. And because there's so much sugar in the blood, oxygen doesn't get delivered, and then the nerves start to suffocate, and then the nerves can no longer function. If you damage them enough that they literally cannot repair and they are fully damaged, you may lose that sensation permanently. So that's neuropathy, neurological damage, right? So that's not so great. We'll also see damage to the kidneys because Again, the kidneys have to process all that extra sugar that's running through them. And then, because your kidneys are basically one giant filter, they can't function properly. And then we see problems in the eyes as well. So you start to see glaucoma of the eyes. I wonder if I could look up glaucoma. If we'll see a picture. Yeah, you start to see like this kind of thing in the eyes, but then that I was kind of hoping to yeah, this is sort of like what can happen with glaucoma. Basically, you'll start to get like tunnel vision, where it'll be like all of this basically disappears and you're only able to see through like a small section. Or sometimes you'll even get I think they call them like, I think the unprofessional term is like floaters. You'll start to get like little bits of things that just kind of permanently block your vision. It's like having Dalmatian vision, so not awesome, right? Those are all, that's just from excessive sugar in the blood. There's just too much of this gunk floating around the blood, special considerations when working with diabetic clients, right? Generally, you are going to set a target goal of 1,000 to 2,000 calories burned through exercise per week. Now that's kind of an interesting way of looking at exercise, right? Rather than saying like, oh, we want to exercise this many days per week, even though that is something we want to do. We're going to set a goal of how many calories to burn per week. Now, why would we approach it that way? Well, Thomas, you'll remember this, but it basically comes through looking at what is called your respiratory exchange ratio. So I'm going to teach this to you guys in later classes much better. But if we look at the respiratory exchange ratio, it is the ratio of how much oxygen is consumed compared with how much CO2 is exhaled. So oxygen comes in, CO2 comes out, right? At least that's the very overly sort of simplified way of looking at it. To be fair, if we're actually being more specific and more scientific about this, you inhale oxygen and some CO2 is going to come out every single time. But there's also some oxygen coming out, because did you use all of it? No, of course not. Some of it didn't get used up, right? That's why you breathe harder when you're exercising. When you're working out and you're like, you're driving in more gas, but you're also exhaling a higher percentage of CO2. Eventually, there's a tipping point where, yes, 100% of the oxygen is getting burned up, and the only thing being exhaled is pure CO2. And so this ratio kind of looks like this. The chart works backwards, right? You can see this blue line represents represents like the amount of CO2 being exhaled, and then this black line represents the amount of oxygen being consumed. At least it can work that way. And so, like, as you work harder, the amount of CO2 exhaled goes up and the amount of oxygen exhaled goes down, until eventually there's no oxygen coming out because you're using all of it, right? Now, here's what's kind of cool. At the same time, your fuel source is also changing. So as the percentage of CO2 exhaled goes up, the percentage of carbohydrates burned for energy also goes up, because your body can burn fat or it can burn carbohydrates for fuel. It's going to choose which fuel it wants to use. When your intensity is really low and you're exhaling plenty of oxygen because you're not using very much oxygen, you are mostly burning fat as a fuel source. And when you are exhaling mostly CO2 and you are burning up all your oxygen, so no oxygen is getting exhaled, then you are burning mostly carbohydrates for fuel, which is what we're seeing here, right? As intensity, sorry, this is the intensity line. As the intensity goes up, the further along, more intense we get, the percentage of calories from carbohydrates starts to climb. So if here is where our intensity is at its lowest, then you can see we are mostly burning burning fat for fuel. And as our intensity starts to go up, then the fuel from from fat starts to go down until eventually we're not burning any fat for fuel. We are only burning carbohydrates. So there is a sort of inverse relationship here, right? And that's what we're seeing over here. When your respiratory exchange ratio is 1.0, which represents 100% of the oxygen that you bring in is burned, then you are burning no fat. You are burning pure carbohydrates. And when your intensity is really low, which is a respiratory exchange ratio of 0.7, then only 70% of the oxygen you bring in actually gets used. 30% of it goes unused. Then you are burning 100% fat for fuel. Another way to think about this 100% carbs for energy is when you are sprinting as hard as you can. And the 100% fat for energy is when you are asleep. That's a good way to think about it. So we're always in some kind of blend there. So that's why we start to look at a target goal of 1,000 to 2,000 calories burned through exercise per week, because that ensures that you are tapping into carbohydrates as a fuel source. You know, we want 1,000 to 2,000 calories from carbohydrates to be burned, which means when you go to refuel, when you eat dinner, breakfast, lunch, whatever, and some of that food is going to be carbohydrates, well, then it will go to restore your glycogen, which you tapped into, rather than being converted into fat, or rather than just leaving that sugar laying around. Does that make sense, guys? Do you start to see, am I being clear with that?
Yeah.
Cool. It's like a kind of a concepty concept. So
That's something that I've been hearing a lot too. Like when I would like browse through like some videos or whatever, like that's what they would explain. So
okay, good.
yeah, I just didn't know it was true, but now you're like spitting the facts. I'm like, okay, it's true.
Love that. Dion, Thomas, you guys feeling good about that?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
I was just asking my nurse a question about that, about the carbohydrates, like when you don't have any more fat to burn.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, right? Like if you, this is why it's actually, we have essential body fat, because your body needs to burn fat at certain times a day, like when you're asleep, right? So if you had like 3% body fat, like that's why bodybuilders actually do have hormonal problems following competition. When their body fat percentages get really low, we see hormonal issues, because that's the other thing we use fat for. We use it to produce our hormones, some of them at least. So yeah, like, we do need to have essential body fat, but when we have excessive body fat, we see other problems, So that's one consideration. Try to aim for about 1,000 to 2,000 calories of exercise, burned. And that's been really easy with like heart rate monitor watches and things like that. That technology has made it a lot easier for us to track that kind of thing. Also, measure your glucose levels before and after exercise, and encourage your clients to say like, hey, make sure your blood sugar levels are within normal ranges before you show up. 1 hour before you come to your session, I want you to do that, do that finger prick, make sure you're in a healthy place. I don't want you passing out on me while we're exercising, and then increase their intake of complex carbohydrates. We're going to encourage our clients when it comes to, if they have diabetes, and their doctor will have already talked to them about this, we are going to encourage them to consume complex carbohydrates rather than simple carbohydrates. So if we look at the difference between simple versus complex carbs, complex carbs are, very high fiber foods, right? Things that are going to take a lot longer to break down. There could even be the same number of carbohydrates here as there are in this picture over here. The grams of carbohydrates might actually be the same, but you can see this is like soda, right? Which is pure sugar. So that sugar is going to just your body's going to bring it into the digestive system and it's going to go, yeah, that's done. We can just go ahead and pass that right into the bloodstream. So there's no breaking down that needs to take place there. Whereas here, this is like whole wheat bread rather than white bread. For the record, there are more calories in whole wheat bread than there are in white bread. So that might make somebody think that this is healthier. But the problem is white bread is so simple that it passes straight into your bloodstream very, very, very quickly. And that's not so good. So it raises your blood sugar fast, which makes your body go, ah, and then it has an insulin response, which decreases insulin sensitivity, which we know is bad, right? So we encourage the intake of complex carbohydrates, which gives a longer sustained energy. We're also going to we're going to go with weight-bearing exercises cautiously. One of the things that is true about having diabetes is that the body repairs more slowly. So because it repairs more slowly, we are going to be a little bit cautious about weight-bearing exercise, because if they, bruise themselves or something like that, that bruise is going to take longer to heal. So we got to be careful with stuff like that. And then one of the things that's actually really important is we are going to encourage our clients with diabetes to wear the appropriate footwear. Now that seems really weird for a trainer to talk about. It seems like it is totally not our area, but we are going to ensure that our client wears comfortable shoes with a good toe box that doesn't have too much friction. And we are going to encourage them to wear socks that are going to wick the sweat away, rather than the type of socks that leave that sweat pooling, because again, that can lead to a blister. Now, why are we talking about blisters? Are we skincare professionals? No, absolutely not. But if a client with diabetes gets a blister, number one, it's going to take longer to heal. Again, metabolically, that's what diabetes is doing to them. And number two, if they have that neuropathy that I talked about earlier, they might not feel that they have a blister. They might be unaware of the fact that they have a hole in their skin, which if they're unaware of it, they're not going to take the precautions associated with a cut or with a wound. And then they're not going to use peroxide or, Neosporin's not about healing, but they're not going to use like peroxide. They're not going to sterilize that wound. And if they don't do that, that wound can get infected. This is why you hear about diabetics oftentimes like losing like a toe or finger or something, right? Number one, it heals more slowly, and number two, they are more prone to infection because they heal more slowly, but also sometimes because they are not aware of the damage. When I worked at Biggest Loser, I spent a lot of time checking people's feet for blisters. It was the unromantic, unglamorous part of that job. I spent a lot of time helping people sterilize any wounds that they did get a blister, because they were doing like 2 hours of hiking a day. If they did get a blister, I spent a lot of time helping them clean that and putting on little sterilized pads and things like that. That was a big part of the job. So appropriate footwear is actually part of our job. Encourage your clients to make sure that they have a shoe with a wide enough toe box, so that their feet can, their toes can actually spread out, rather than, a narrow toe box, which is going to freaking, look at this, right? You can see the feet are all jammed up in this version here. That's a blister right there, guaranteed. Versus here, the toes can spread out. So make sure that they have the appropriate footwear. If they have diabetes, that is actually going to be important. And then if they have like insulin medication that they're taking, like if they're taking like type 2 diabetes medication, make sure you're being cautious about if that insulin sensitivity increases through exercise, make sure they're being cautious about taking the same amount of medication. For the record, do not tell your client to take less of their medication. Do not tell them to adjust the amount of insulin that they're taking. That is not what I'm saying. But if they exercise regularly and they start to notice that they are, feeling low blood sugar more often, that could be because you have increased their sensitivity through exercise. So tell them to go talk to their doctor about the possible need for adjusting their medication. Don't ever tell a client to adjust their medication, but you can always tell a client to check in with their doctor about adjusting their medication. Big difference there. Never step over that line. I've heard trainers step over that line and where they're like, oh, well, maybe you just need to take it less insulin now. And I'm like, it makes me cringe because that puts you like legally liable if that person like stops taking their insulin, then all of a sudden they lose a freaking finger or something. Yeah, don't do that. You're opening yourself up for litigation, which is, and also like you could hurt somebody, and that's not great either. Okay, so general tips and tricks, general rules for diabetic clients. Again, low impact exercise such as treadmill walking, rowing, or stationary cycling. That looks the same, right? It is very similar for our obese clients. Frequency was at least 5 days a week for obese clients. Well, it's 4 to 7 days per week for clients with diabetes. We're just giving that a little bit of a range in case like they have high blood sugar days and low blood sugar days. We can drop that frequency down to 4, but as they start to get, better at it, yeah, we can take that frequency up to even 7 days per week where we're encouraging them to be, exercise regularly. We're going to say 50 to 90% maximum heart rate for the intensity. That is the highest intensity we have seen so far in this course. And that is because, again, going back to what I said earlier, the high intensity burns more carbohydrates. Low intensity burns more fat. So with a weight loss client who doesn't have diabetes, the priority might be fat burning. Whereas a client with diabetes, we definitely are prioritizing burning carbohydrates as a fuel source. Duration can be as low as 20 minutes if you can get like high intensity interval training out of the way. Great, burn those carbs and then rest. But if they need a little bit more sustained, they can go up to about 60 minutes there. Assessments, totally normal here. Pushing assessment, pulling assessment, overhead squat, single leg squat, single leg bound, all of them are good. We really don't have to be too cautious about that. Same thing with the flexibility continuum. You can use the full flexibility continuum. Any type of stretches are going to be appropriate. Be a little bit cautious about the dynamic stuff if it's the kind of thing that's like really high impact on the feet. Again, you don't want to cause any blisters because you're doing like high knees and butt kickers and side shuffling and stuff like that. But for the most part, use the entire flexibility continuum. For resistance training, we're going to go 1 to 3 sets of anywhere from 10 to 15 repetitions, 2 to 3 days per week. That range right in there is going to prioritize burning carbohydrates. I will say if I've got a diabetic client, I try to keep it around 10 because 10 is right in the middle of glycolysis, which means it's right in the middle of carb burning central. You start to get into 15 repetitions, the intensity starts to drop a little bit. And so then you're starting to get into that fat burning stuff, which if my client's obese, I'm good with. But if they just have diabetes and I'm really focused on just like glucose control, I like 10 repetitions personally. Special considerations, like I said, be cautious with that footwear. Have them keep a snack handy. That is actually going to be really important in case like their blood sugar levels drop. If they do start to increase their insulin sensitivity, and then all of a sudden their blood sugar levels drop because their body makes some insulin and you're working out and you just burn through all their carbohydrates. For the record, it's kind of a good thing. It's a sign that you're moving in the right direction, but your client's going to get nauseous. They're going to throw up. They're going to pass out. We don't want any of that to happen. So always encourage them to keep like a banana in their bag or an apple, some crackers and cheese, something that's going to give them a little bit of energy really quickly. And then for SMR, use it with special care just in case. When it comes to SMR, again, if their body is repairing more slowly and bruising is a risk for them, just be careful. You don't want to bruise your client. All right, any questions on obesity or any questions on diabetes before we move into working with pregnant clients?
So far so good.
Moving on. So clients who are pregnant, couple little special considerations that we have got. We've got decreased oxygen availability. Here's the thing. You can absolutely work out pregnant. There's nothing to be worried about there. You are not at risk for harming the baby. You know, sometimes people think that like, oh, their body temperature is going up and that's going to harm the baby. Absolutely not. You know, they're going to be just fine. If they have a fever, that's different, but that's, you know, that's not what exercise does, you know. However, that being said, be cautious of excessive body temperature because it's already really uncomfortable to be pregnant. And so now you are taking someone who's uncomfortable and making them more uncomfortable. So they might start to hate exercising. And that's also something we are trying to avoid. But they can exercise all the way up into the 3rd trimester with a logical reduction. You know, should you be doing box jumps? Yeah, probably not. Is it going to harm the baby? Not really. But it is extremely uncomfortable. But you'll see like there's some famous like you'll see like these famous pictures of like CrossFit athletes doing like power snatches and cleans. I don't think you necessarily need to do that. But you certainly can, you know, and it's actually just fine. It's not going to harm the baby at all. However, again, shortness of breath should be considered here. They are growing a human inside where their diaphragm is. So this is why like pregnant women sometimes deal with like, you know, even things like hiccups and heartburn and stuff. There's just lack of space. Stuff's moving around in a way that they're not used to. And so, you know, shortness of breath should be considered there. High risk pregnancies are pregnancies over the age of 35. I will say more and more research is coming out that is sort of for the most part saying that stuff like this is kind of a myth. That above 35 thing is less dangerous than we have kind of given it credit for over the years. However, it's still in the book, so we're going to, you know, work off that definition. If they have had a history of miscarriage, be cautious. You know, if they have a history of diabetes, sometimes because there is a second body in there, you can get what's called prenatal diabetes, which is basically a temporary diabetes that happens during pregnancy. Same thing if they have like a history of anemia or thyroid disorders, history of obesity, or if they have been sedentary most of their life and then they start to exercise. These are all things that we do want to be cautious about. You know, the anemia, we want to be cautious to make sure they don't faint. The sedentary lifestyle, we're going to be cautious to make sure they don't overdo it. But be cautious of things like that. Also, posture can affect things during like rigorous exercise. So we are going to avoid prone, so laying face down, or supine, laying face up positions. For the most part, we are going to keep our client upright the entire time. Now, that's really similar to working with obese clients, right? We try to keep them standing the entire time. But we don't necessarily have to keep our clients standing. We just want to try to keep them upright. So standing or seated positions are going to be the most comfortable and safest. Even in the absence of exercise, they will probably want to, you know, obviously when we exercise, we need to increase our caloric intake in response, unless we're trying to lose weight. And so even without that, you know, they are going to want to increase their calorie intake by about 300 extra calories per day in order to maintain a neutral energy balance. The fear about like the fetus being harmed by like exercise, you know, because like, oh, well, you're exercising, so all your blood's going to your muscles and it's not going to the baby. Not true. You don't have to worry about stuff like that. The idea that like increasing body temperature is dangerous, not true. Shouldn't have to worry about that. Again, the only thing you need to worry about like thermoregulation is that clients will often experience changes in body temperature rapidly when they are pregnant. There's more hormones and therefore like increase in temperature as pregnant is present. We also see it just gets really uncomfortable. You know, every pregnant client I've ever talked to is like, it's hot, turn on the AC. I'm so uncomfortable. I'm going to kill you. You know, they get cranky pretty quickly. So just, be aware of that. It's not a safety risk. It's just an uncomfortable risk, So those are quotes. Those are direct quotes. So mode, low impact step aerobics, or anything that avoids any like rapid jarring action is going to be recommended. Low impact treadmill walking, low impact stationary cycling, water activities, all those things are really good. Rowing machine, probably not so much, just because it's going to cause like abdominal compression, which is uncomfortable. And so, they're just not going to enjoy that. So instead, we focus on the things that they are going to enjoy, especially water activities. Water activities are great. Takes all the weight off. It's a good, sort of break from dealing with that. Frequency, anywhere from 3 to 5 days per week in particular is going to be recommended, pretty standard stuff there. The intensity, we're going to go anywhere. This is a unique way of prescribing this, anywhere from about 140 to 160 beats per minute on average. So when you think about that, if you think like somebody between 220 minus, let's say age 20, to anywhere from like 220 minus, we'll say age 35. If we consider like 140 divided by 200, that's about 70% of their heart rate max, or 140 divided by 160, that's about 85% of their 1 rep max. So basically we're anywhere from zone 1 through zone 2. So we're really just, if we think about the talk test, again, we're avoiding zone 3. We're avoiding massive high intensity sprints there, so 60 to 85 or 70 to 85%. I think I just said 1 rate max a second ago. I meant heart rate max. Up to about 85% heart rate max at the most. We don't really want to go any higher than that. Duration, probably only 15 to 30 minutes. Part of the things that are tough about like dealing with pregnancy is all that extra body weight without necessarily like the muscular structure to deal with it. And so it does get kind of uncomfortable on the feet, and like the lower body just kind of gets a little achy and uncomfortable. So we'll keep the duration a little bit shorter there, only 15 to 30 minutes. If they can deal with a full 60-minute session, go for it. It's really just a comfort thing. Assessments, totally normal stuff here. Pushing assessment, pulling assessment, overhead squat, single leg squat, all of it's normal. For the most part, we're going to probably focus when it comes to flexibility on static stretches or active stretches, and self-myofascial release if it's comfortable. So we can do foam rolling with pregnant clients safely. They don't have to anything to worry about there. However, it could be uncomfortable. So if it is, avoid it. And then we're going to focus on static and active stretches just because they are the low impact stretches. Dynamic stretches, if you're doing like arm circles, that's probably fine. Arm swings, that kind of stuff is fine. Those are the dynamic stretches that are fine. But like spinal twists, high knees, butt kickers, side shuffle, those kind of dynamic stretches, lunge with a twist, they just put pressure in ways that are kind of high impact. And so they're really uncomfortable. So you're probably going to avoid those. For resistance training, we're going to keep the intensity relatively low as well. So 2 to 3 days a week, 12 to 15 repetitions. Those are the highest repetitions we've seen so far in this course. And that's because this is the lowest intensity lifting. We're really just we're not really trying to build muscle while, our client is going through pregnancy. We're just trying to maintain their strength and maintain their physical activity. And the best ways to do that are to keep the intensity relatively low. And then special considerations, avoid any prone or supine positions after 12 weeks of pregnancy. So after about after the 3rd month there, you're getting into the 2nd and 3rd trimesters. We want to keep them we want to avoid laying them face up or face down. It's uncomfortable, changes the blood flow and things like that. And so it's just not, what we're focused on. So that is pregnancy, but to go a little bit more in detail about that, let's take a look at sort of an example version of a SOAP note here. So If I were sort of just coming up with a general sort of action plan here for a client who is going through pregnancy, let's take a look. This is our client, Diane. She is an accountant. That's a generally sedentary job that causes a lot of stress, and she often wears heels to work. Her hobbies include like baking. She likes desserts, watching movies, and swimming. She has been a diabetic for 10 years. So she's been taking insulin daily. And she is in her first trimester. So she is 35 years old, 264 pounds, which means she is also falling into the obese category. Her waist to hip ratio is 0.95. I probably wouldn't pay too much attention to that if she's going through pregnancy, because that is obviously going to adjust that ratio. But 0.95 does put us at increased risk. You know, if you look at the waist, look at the waist to hip ratio here. Ideally, you know, when we see that excessive abdominal obesity, right, that does put us at sort of an increased risk there, right? You know, because we know abdominal fat in particular is the most dangerous. Like I said, it starts to act like its own organ. It starts to have its own metabolism. Really dangerous stuff there. Doing the overhead squat, we saw her arms fall forward, and we also saw her feet turn out, which makes a lot of sense. She's also got a forward head posture. You know, both of these things are associated with very sedentary jobs and very stressful jobs. And then the feet turnout is very much associated with that elevated heel posture. So, you know, we're seeing tight calf muscles. Blood pressure is not quite hypertensive, but it is definitely pre-hypertensive. So, you know, definitely something we're working on. We're going to put emphasis on the overhead squat, the pushing and the pulling assessment especially. We're going to skip the cardio assessment for now, because we know that our goal is just to generally increase activity. Once she, you know, baby's out of there and she's back to sort of normal, we are going to put more emphasis on probably the cardio stuff and burning calories and working on reducing her body weight. But for now, the goal is not necessarily weight loss. It is just to keep her moving throughout her pregnancy. And we are going to pay attention to her body mass index as that adjusts, and pay attention to her blood pressure. Resistance training, we're going to focus on about 3 days a week of strength training with about 2 30-minute swims per week, so she can get in the water and take the body weight pressure off. And we're going to keep this down to about 30 minutes in terms of her strength training session. So that routine we built earlier with 2 circuits, probably not going to be appropriate for a 30-minute session. So we're probably just going to do 1 circuit per day. And then now we can have a workout A and we can have a workout B. So she can alternate between the 2. 12 to 15 repetitions, 2 to 3 sets. So that pairs up really well with what we saw here. So we'd probably go like 3 sets, like 12 repetitions there, or 15 repetitions there. Or we could do week 1 is 12 and week 2 is 15. And then we can, you know, or we could go, you know, let's see here. This is week 1, 2 sets, 12 reps, right? And then week 2, we could change that to 2 sets of 15 reps. Week 3, we could change that to 3 sets of 12. Wow. 3 sets of 12. And then week 4, which is our final week before changing up her routine, we could keep it at 3 sets and go for, you know, 3 sets of 15. And that would be a good way to kind of progress her. And then that's 4 weeks. Let's change up her routine, do something new. Low to moderate intensity, you know, obviously if we're doing as high as 12 or 15 reps. We're going to focus on compound or isolation exercises rather than total body stuff, just because we don't want to put too much pressure in areas that are going to feel uncomfortable. Cardio, 2 days a week, 30 minutes in the pool. She should be able to hold a conversation the entire time, right? She shouldn't have any trouble breathing, obviously, other than being underwater. But we want to keep her comfortable, right? For her static stretches, you can see we're focusing primarily on the lats, the pecs, the teres major, and then the calves, right? So we're focused on that feet turn out stuff, and we're focused on that arm fall forward, head arms fall forward, forward head posture problems. Special considerations, we're going to tell her to go get some athletic shoes so that she's comfortable. Consider parking further away when she's going to the grocery store, because then she can burn a couple extra calories here and there. And then focus on complex carbohydrates while also implementing a little bit of a food journal. Those are all some fun things that are going to help us not only manage her body weight, but also manage her hunger cravings, and build a better relationship with food. And there we go. So now you can see we're starting to step outside of just the training stuff. We started talking a little bit about like the diet stuff there, and a little bit about the lifestyle stuff there. So, you know, it's not always about the gym. Sometimes being a trainer is about stuff outside the gym as well. All right, guys, that's pretty much it today. Man, my camera is like not focusing. Do you guys have any questions or comments? Dion, Eddie, Thomas, how you guys feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good.
Love that. You guys are feeling good. All right. Well, I'm going to kill the recording